ever hear of Crazy Joe Gallo? Well, at my dad's shop when I was a kid, he was just a bookie, and I saw him almost beat a man to death with that chair right there. You know, and that's the kind of, you know, it was that blood and guts, and that shop was actually known to be the bloodiest tattoo shop in the Bowery. There was blood splattered on the flash that it was stained there, you know what I mean? So those were the kind of characters that were the ones before me.
They were real unique characters, you know? So those old guys didn't make a living out of tattooing. They all had full-time jobs. Pop Eddie was born and raised in San Francisco and raised 6 children, and could you imagine raising a family of 6 kids and riding a goddamn bus all the time? I mean, that was, it wouldn't happen today, you know? But they always dressed properly. Most guys wore hats, suits, ties. Now everybody looks like a goddamn buffalo skinner.
When I started, you know, tattooing, and in that era, you know, there was no tattoos on TV. It was, you know, that's why I say it was more of almost an underground kind of thing. I mean, it was legal, but there were many places, many more places then it was not legal. It was very secretive in the old days, and people didn't want to tell you anything. Some people you worked for, they wouldn't give you the address of the supplier because you know, they feared that, you know, if you got this knowledge, then you'd get your own stuff, and then you'd open up down the street. And of course, little did they know, you know, how it is these days. I mean, it's almost like there's a tattoo shop on every corner, and it was never supposed to be like that. I mean, like it was more like an, I don't know, underground thing almost back in the day, an outlaw thing, blue collar thing, you know.
Ed Hardy was doing Japanese, Sailor Jerry was doing Japanese, Zeke was doing Japanese. Some other people, like Cliff was interested in Japanese. Don Nolan was interested, and Tommy Yeoman were interested in Japanese, but we were sharing as much as we could with each other about what we were finding, and about, you know, what books to buy, and what these animals meant, and, you know, all of, and it was just, it was so heady. And we were mad about each other. We were crazy about tattooing. We were crazy about this new field of kunioshi in Japanese. Also, this is in New York City. Everything was illegal. You had to know where to go. You had to have, you know, kind of an inn to get in. It was like a speakeasy kind of situation. Women and civilians didn't get tattooed at this time. I mean, seriously, it was for sailors and for sort of sociopaths.
I never saw a tattoo shop till I think it was 1976 in Cincinnati, and this little shop opened up in a barber shop and had a few dragons painted over the plywood over the glass to keep the glass from being broken. It was down by a honky-tonk down there that served beer in mason jars and bluegrass music.
Arcades. You had Market Street, you had arcades, you had a few, and the arcade is, like I said, it had generally has a shooting gallery in it. It might have pinball machines in it. Up in front, it's got a hot dog stand in the center. It's got a slum jewelry counter on one side, which is sort of the office too. On the other side, shoe shining. Then you go back in there. Some of them had a mug joint, which is a photographic joint, with a couple young trollops, big bazooms or whatever, but outgoing young ladies.
You had all the gypsies, you had all the prostitutes, you had all the cops, you had the Filipino cockfighters, you had the jazz musicians, you had the topless dancers, you had, you know, all of this mix of incredible, colorful characters all over Hotel Street. And the air smelled like teriyaki sauce and coconuts, and it was amazing.
The tattoo stand was sort of a wooden platform, a couple of steps up, and you had this wooden platform. And there was no running water. There were no toilet facilities or wash basin or anything else. So you went to the spigot and filled the bucket, and you rinsed your tattoo machine in the bucket. and you had a sponge and you wiped off the Vaseline and the ink and the blood that was coming on the arm and rinsed out the sponge in the bucket. At the end of the evening, and sometimes, you know, you kept open until the place, until there were no more customers. So sometimes it was 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes it was 2 o'clock in the morning. You then took your bucket and you poured out what now was tar. It was pitch black. Okay, a soup of blood, inks, Vaseline, whatever, hairs that had been shaved off. I mean, you shaved them, and of course the razor also was rinsed in the bucket, and there were always some hairs sticking to the razor, so it was a horrible mess. But that's the way the business was done in those days.
Just to go and visit those shops, they were very guarded. You know, you couldn't go in there and ask questions. You'd get your ass thrown right out.
Tattooing wasn't that popular, so there wasn't that much tattooing going on. So if you went in and told somebody you wanted to be a tattoo artist, what you were doing was flat-footedly standing there telling the man that you wanted to be his competition.
When it's illegal, obviously, you can't advertise and you can't put your name in the phone book. So I drew up some business cards. The shop was named Catfish Tattoo Studio. And Michael would take a fistful of these during the day and just walk the streets of New York. And when he saw somebody who had a visible tattoo, and that was very rare to see anybody who had any ink showing at all. If he'd see just a glimmer of a little tattoo, he'd go up and hand them a card. And then after 6 o'clock, people would call, we'd give them the address, they'd come over. To me, tattooing is like living in a living art gallery.
Unfortunately, a lot of this history from tattooing from way back is going to be lost as more and more people die. I mentioned to somebody recently, need to get a convention to where late at night when everybody's sitting around the bar and they're telling their stories, you remember 25, 30 years ago this or that, somebody needs to be writing that down or recording it, because as that person dies, those stories are gone.
Zeke supposedly had this monkey, and one day, I don't know what happened to Zeke. He left the monkey, or the monkey got out of his cage, and the monkey was like running around the shop and doing all kinds of weird stuff, and took out all this tattoo ink in the bottles and was squirting it around, and he had all this red, the monkey had all this red ink like splattered everywhere. And Zeke, I don't know if the story is true or not, but there's a front counter, you know, and then you go through the gate and everything to go in the back and get tattooed. But I think Zeke was passed out. He said that Zeke was passed out, and all Danny could see were these feet and all this red that looked like blood. And he goes in there and is like totally freaked out and thought, oh my God, he's been killed. And this monkey is like up on the rafters or up there, you know, going chee, 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 chee. And all this red ink is everywhere, and it's like, oh God.